My topics dovetail nicely into General Williamson, and in fact play off them to some extent. So from an industry standpoint, I've been asked to discuss what are the critical ingredients in a successful long-term and effective partnership with the MOD. And I would offer that good work for fair pay in an ethical environment is a very good starting premise. It's, if you believe that and you enter into discussions that way, you're off to a good start. A recognition on both parties that they have the responsibility for contract execution is shared. If either the contractor or the MOD have a long-term failure on their portion of it, then the relationship suffers, but more importantly, the output is not as described or desired, and that doesn't benefit anyone. So immediately, the ability to get back and focus on the outcomes in terms of both capability, capacity, or product delivery becomes paramount. I think partnership starts with good and defined requirements, which our first speaker spoke eloquently to. So the contractual relationship of a well-defined requirement reflects both parties' expectations. Now that sounds as if that's just common sense, but I will tell you that more often than not, it is the exception than the rule, and that is unfortunate. Clear understanding of the impact of change in hard requirements in contracts, an obligation on the part of the contractor to clearly explain risk, cost, delay in outcomes, and a responsibility on the part of the MOD to resist whimsical change because there's been a change in, quote, management. So I think, once again, the discussion about the SOR responsibilities and pulling that up and dovetailing with the discussion of what the U.S. is doing in terms of making this commander's business is important. Because if you're working to hard requirements, then your opportunity to stay on track is much better if you truly understand that you can invest in that over time. I think there's a recognition that the best partnerships in industry, in diplomacy perhaps, certainly in life, are based on honesty, trust, and openness, underpinned by a recognition of consequence for violating the tenets that form the basis of that relationship. So a good contract is one that is rarely mentioned by either party. It doesn't mean that careful management of both the complexities of rewards and penalties alike is there, but it's one that's done with an attitude towards progress. It's about moving forward, and all partnerships, you would hope, would have that attribute. I was also asked to talk about how might the defense industry work to enable regeneration and reconstitution of capabilities. First, as a comment from a logistician's point of view, the majority of buy in defense in terms of volume comes very much out of the commercial side. So some 80 to 90% of commodities are commercially available and certainly come from that genre. That isn't by cost, because when you get into those things, aircraft carriers, airplanes, tanks, etc., those cost more, fewer of them. But if you just talk about the sheer volume, they reside largely in the commercial world, and so industry at very many levels has a responsibility, and in fact, a capacity and capability to be involved in the regeneration in particular. I think the sale of DSG earlier this year clearly puts industry in that responsible area for platforms and upgrades, as well as the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, or if there is enough interest and opportunity, there'll be an emerging capacity, and that's good probably for everyone. That would be a market-dictated capability. Specialist training has already moved into the industry. Reconstitution of war stocks, even in munitions, is already there. So Industry is heavily into this portfolio when it comes to regeneration and reconstitution. But the military role is the prime one, always. And clearly setting priorities really makes a difference. Incumbent in that is a timely discussion of the realm of the possible, and then decisions on those priorities. And they ought to be not just about the next, but they ought to be about an evolving mission set. Too often, armies in particular fight the next war with the last war's munitions, equipment, thought process, and it is a lesson learned and not often applied, with great cost. In our world today, we have the ability, with the management of information, to have a better perspective on that, and both industry and defenses alike ought to be engaged in that discussion. So actionable information based on reliable and timely data becomes an enabler that allows support chains to be poised and active in the responsive manner needed for regeneration. But as significant as that is for the whole reconstitution phase, it probably serves an even more important role in supporting surge requirements. The last question I was asked to touch on is, what is the risk to the MOD? The main risk always when you talk about outsourcing is a capability once gone, it's very hard to come back. Very rarely does that happen. One of my past roles as the Defense Logistics commander for their depots, we started down the process of outsourcing those for operation. And one actually did end up coming back. But that is by far the rarity. And I think at the end of the day, it went back out again. So it becomes important that the MOD is reliant on its contractors, so back to the partnership equation, the discussions that need to take place. But here, and I think this is not insignificant, this relationship and how this all works can be managed by the MOD and by improving their ability to act as an intelligent customer, by understanding the environment that their contractors operate in and demanding what they need and want whenever possible in a timely, realistic manner in terms of when it should come forth. Yesterday, CGS talked about money being moved to the FLCs as a way to better optimize the business of the Army. I think the opportunity for change incumbent with that is important, because what it means is that the MOD has the opportunity to understand the cost of their decisions or the lack of a decision, and that becomes much more apparent as they become not only a more sophisticated demander, but a true understanding of their consumption, what it means, what it costs. You know, when your mother tells you what she wants for her birthday 6 weeks early, and you forget to buy it until a day before, you don't care what it costs or what it takes to get it there, because you have failed in this relationship. Too often, if you don't understand the costs and you have a sergeant beating on your head or something else, you make decisions without understanding consequence. And you're reacting to the thing closest to your concern level. So I think that intelligent customer and the frontline commands owning the monies and the responsibility for their execution makes a huge difference. And I congratulate you on that, sir. I think there needs to be a recognition that major cost cuts come out just once, low-hanging fruit, if you will. After that, it's about process improvement. It's about things that can and should lead to higher efficiencies, effectiveness, and better cost controls and cost avoidance. That's, a lot of people talk about how they're going to lower the cost of doing something. Well, you really only do that once. After that, it's how you control that cost and the benefits that you derive from the avoidance of cost. Much tougher, by the way, to to put those in a nice briefing package to demonstrate to somebody how you're bringing value for money, but it's a really important ingredient that we should never lose sight of. I think, in the stringent financial environment of today and tomorrow, where defense budgets are often going to be in competition to show value against healthcare and homeland security demands, the defense industry can and should look to diversification so that they can take the innovation and capabilities created in partnership with the MOD and offer those to a larger venue, to a larger audience, who will then apply the things they need, invest in that. That ought to benefit the MOD. That should revitalize innovations that the MOD maybe can no longer afford because they've moved on to another priority. But there ought to be a benefit there, and industry can facilitate that. So all this is possible in an environment where recognition that contracts should be mutually beneficial to both parties, that it's a balancing act, and if there is a perception, perceived or real, that one party has an advantage over the other, then you begin an adversarial nature, you begin to start down that line. And that's not where you want to be if this is about partnership. So let me just restate what I said earlier. The best contracts are those that rarely are mentioned as by either party as they move forward in execution. They really are, then, partnership at its best. Look forward to your questions. Thanks.